People say yoga brings peace, balance, and purity. I believe that too, at least until the night I bent down to pick up my wife's yoga bag and found inside not a rolled mat or a coconut water bottle, but a gleaming Japanese tube of lubricant. It was sitting there, tucked neatly in the side pocket of the beige bag Maya carried to teach class every evening. The metallic silver caught the kitchen light like a sealed confession. I lifted it, turned it over in my hand. Expensive, refined, imported. Definitely not something you grab last minute at CVS. Maya loved preaching to her students. Your body is a temple. Yoga is the path to purity. Let clean energy flow through you. And yet, in her bag, this so-called temple came equipped with industrial strength enhancements. If the body is a temple, then I suppose Maya just started selling tickets at the door to someone not mentioned in our vows. I didn't explode. A lawyer never lets emotion run the courtroom. I simply opened my leather notebook, uncapped my Mont Blanc, and wrote the first line. Exhibit A, tube of lubricant. Date, time, 9:42 p.m. In law, we call this discovery. You open a case file and stumble across a small document that changes everything. The only difference was that this file wasn't in my office, but in my wife's yoga bag after 12 years of marriage. I sat down on the couch, the tube still in my hand, studying it like foreign evidence. In my head, sarcastic lines echoed. Yoga relieves stress. Sure. Stress of what kind exactly? Don't let impurities enter the body. Right. Unless you count Adrian from the gym. The irony burned. Maya once laughed at me for seeing contracts everywhere. She never realized our marriage was about to become the biggest losing contract of my career, and I was preparing to litigate. I set the tube on the coffee table and leaned back. The wall clock ticked steadily. No throwing things, no shouting, no late-night confrontation. I had watched too many clients sabotage themselves with that mistake, turning into lunatics in the eyes of the court. I wasn't about to join them. I took a sip of bourbon, the burn sliding down my throat, and added to my notes. Exhibit B, suspicious teaching hours. Exhibit C, potential financial irregularities. Yes, I started naming evidence that didn't exist yet. A good lawyer always thinks 3 moves ahead, and I had just convened my own private trial. I thought back to the nights Maya came home late. Students needed extra practice, she said. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But now every detail returned, like rereading a contract and spotting the deadly fine print. The late nights, the pricier bottled water, that mysterious smile on her face when she texted, all of it sliding into place. I gave a bitter laugh. Not the kind born of joy, but the kind that comes when you realize you've been played. I'd protected clients' assets worth millions, yet failed to protect myself from one little case study for the legal profession. Some would ask, why not confront her? Why not throw it in her face and demand answers? Because I didn't want my marriage reduced to a midnight shouting match. I wanted a verdict. I wanted the truth to stand on its own, without noise. So I zipped the tube back into the bag, carefully, as if nothing had happened. But in my mind, the case file was open. I was plaintiff, lawyer, and judge. Maya was the defendant. From the outside, it must have looked ridiculous. A middle-aged man alone in his living room, sipping bourbon and scribbling in a notebook, while a rerun baseball game played on TV. But I knew better. The biggest lawsuits often begin with the smallest exhibits, and I had just found mine. I closed the notebook, leaned my head against the chair. Outside, the October wind rattled dry leaves along the sidewalk. Inside, one thought circled in my mind. The game has begun, and now I want to ask you, the ones watching this story from every corner, what about you? Has a small detail ever turned your life upside down? A bill? A stray text? An item that slipped from a bag? Tell me your city, your state, even your country, so I'll know I'm not alone in my own Exhibit A. In law, discovery has always been my favorite stage. That's when a lawyer rips through every email, every smudged fax, every digit on a bank statement. Outsiders see it as dull. To us, it's a treasure hunt. And that night I realized discovery doesn't just live in court. It lives inside my marriage. Only instead of digging through contracts, I was digging through yoga classes that ran past midnight, hotel receipts that lined up too neatly, and text messages hidden as carefully as the deep breathing exercises Maya taught. I started with the yoga schedule. Maya usually kept her teaching planner on the kitchen counter, looking no different from an office calendar. But lately the classes stretched oddly long. A normal yoga class runs 60 minutes, maybe 75 with extra stretching. Yet in her calendar, 3 classes ended at 11 at night. The studio closed at 10. I wrote it down. Exhibit B, Yoga Schedule Discrepancies. Next came the receipts. I had access to our joint account, a privilege I rarely used. But for a lawyer, access is a subpoena. Scrolling through transactions, I spotted a few charges from Marriott hotels. At first, I dismissed them as client-related. Then I noticed the dates matched perfectly with her so-called late classes. I printed them, clipped them, and filed them neatly. Exhibit C, Marriott receipts. And then came the most entertaining part, messages. I'd never been the type of man to snoop through my wife's phone, but once Exhibit A existed, my moral boundaries grew flexible. I didn't dig far. Maya had left her iPad on the table, and the screen lit up with a notification, a messaging app I didn't recognize. I opened it. The first words I saw were, "Don't forget the tube." I laughed like a judge listening to a ridiculous defense. Out of all the evidence in the world, that line was the perfect marriage of comedy and tragedy. I noted it. Exhibit D, text message, "Don't forget the tube." I sat at the desk, switched on the printer. The clatter filled the room as page after page slid out, each sheet carrying another piece of betrayal. I stapled them, labeled them as if preparing to submit in court. Cross versus cross, preliminary discovery. Looking at that small stack, I mocked myself. I'd once prosecuted multi-million-dollar embezzlement, stared down CEOs swearing under oath. Now here I was investigating a tube of lubricant worth $19.99, with consequences as heavy as bankruptcy. The more I collected, the more forgotten details resurfaced. The strange perfume she brought home. I assumed it was from a student's hug. The rushed showers right after class. I thought the studio had been too hot. Her secret smiles at her phone. I thought it was silly memes from friends. In reality, they were unnumbered exhibits. I poured another bourbon, sipped, and chuckled to myself. Not joyful laughter, but bitter. Daniel Cross. Own home. This would go down as the most humiliating loss of my career, but the irony steadied me. If Maya thought I would scream or smash things, she miscalculated. I wasn't a hot-headed 20-year-old. I was a 44-year-old attorney who fought with printouts, evidence, and exhibits. And trust me, exhibits scare people more than fists. I glanced around the living room. The worn sofa. The TV is replaying an old Cubs game. I wondered how many households in Chicago lived inside the same illusion I once did. How many husbands sipping bourbon, convinced their wives were teaching yoga late, while the truth sat in a gym bag. I added another line. Exhibit E, pattern of late-night classes. One by one, every small detail, from perfume scents to fake schedules, turned into evidence. As the file thickened, I started imagining the trial itself. I'd walk in and present exhibit after exhibit. Judge me, jury, me. And Maya would have no lawyer clever enough to dodge it all. One day, she'll look at me, trembling, and ask, "When did you know?" And I'll smile and answer, "Since Exhibit A." I closed the file and set it neatly on the table. Discovery had begun, and as always, I would see this case through to the end. Discovery was enough to convince me I wasn't living in illusions anymore. Late-night yoga sessions that ended at 11, Marriott receipts, and the text that read, "Don't forget the tube." All of it lined up like a fraudulent contract. And like every case, once discovery ends, the next stage is deposition, the pressure that forces the other side to show their face. But I didn't need to put Maya under oath. I knew she would deny until the very end. I chose another form of deposition, one where I didn't need to ask questions at all. The evidence would speak for itself. And Exhibit A, the silver tube of gel, was where I began. Friday night, Maya left her yoga bag in the corner, just like always. I heard the shower running, the familiar scent of mint shampoo drifting out. I walked over, unzipped the bag. The tube lay there, harmless, gleaming like a silver ingot. I lifted it, about 2/3 full, enough to make a case. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a special mix, a diluted capsaicin solution left over from a defective product lawsuit, blended with the peppermint oil Maya used for her diffuser. Heat that burns like fire, cold that stings like ice. Together, a duet of agony no one could endure. I slipped on gloves, opened the tube, squeezed some out, mixed it, and funneled it back in. Wiped it clean, tightened the cap. A lawyer's skills aren't just about cross-examination. Sometimes they're about pretending nothing ever happened. I zipped the bag, sat back on the sofa. The TV laugh track roared. I laughed too, but mine was dry, hollow, shared with no one. Maya stepped out of the bathroom, hair tied high, tight workout gear hugging her frame. She kissed my cheek. "I have a class tonight, probably late." I nodded, smiled like the dutiful husband, and silently noted. Exhibit E, cover story, late class. 30 minutes later, the door closed. I sat still, waiting. I didn't know where she would meet Adrian, Marriott or the rented condo near the club. Either way, the tube was about to go live. I poured bourbon, stared out the window at the street below. Cars moved, and lamplight cast long shadows. In my head, I pictured the two of them rushing toward each other, thrilled, and then moments later, writhing from the fire in their skin. Hot yoga and flaming badminton, though not in the way they hoped. Around 1 in the morning, I heard sirens in the distance. Chicago is always noisy, but that night the wail felt personal, like a soundtrack to my plan. I wasn't there, but the next morning, checking the hospital's digital admissions system, a resource lawyers often use for accident claims, I saw 2 names, Maya Cross and Adrian Cole. Same time. Diagnosis, severe irritation, chemical burns. I laughed, this time out loud. Exhibit B, ER admission, 2 affair turned into medical slapstick. I imagine the EMTs hauling them out of the hotel, faces twisted, trying to hold composure and failing. The paramedics must have struggled not to laugh. And if one of them secretly recorded it, I wouldn't be surprised to see it online soon under the headline, "Couple on fire, not the romantic kind." Maya came home at noon the next day, pale, limping. She blamed it on a cosmetic allergy. I nodded, pretended to believe, and poured her water. "You should take a few days off," I said kindly. In my head I wrote, Exhibit F, false alibi, cosmetic allergy. I remembered the fraud cases I had worked. Defendants always shared the same habit: deny, deny, and deny again. Maya was no different, but evidence doesn't need confession. Evidence is when she and Adrian signed into the ER together. That was the verdict. I didn't gloat, or rather, I didn't let myself gloat for long. Lawyers know one exhibit is never enough. You need a chain. Documents, data, motive, pattern. The bedroom fire drill was just a warm-up, a deposition without words, where Maya and Adrian signed their own statements with scorched skin. That night, as Maya slept under the haze of painkillers, I sat in the living room, thickening the case file with hospital reports, medical notes, and EMT statements. I stapled, numbered, and filed. The binder swelled, looking every bit like a lawsuit entering its fiercest stage. I mocked myself again. How absurd. All those years fighting for clients, exposing million-dollar fraud. And here I was, using the same craft against my wife and a washed-up badminton player. In this line of work, laughter is always bitter. I looked out the window. The Chicago night was dark, and the wind howled through the cracks. But inside me, everything was clear. Exhibit A. Exhibit B. They had spoken already, and I knew this was only the opening act. If the story had ended with the swap tube, I might have filed it away as a private act of retaliation and been done with it. But to a lawyer, no case ever ends with a single blow. Physical evidence is just the prelude. I needed something stronger, something that could bury not only the relationship, but also their reputations and their wallets. And as every lawyer knows, follow the money and you'll always find the truth. I opened my laptop, logged into our joint account. Maya rarely paid attention to it, trusting me to handle finances. But sometimes trust itself is the most overlooked exhibit. I began scanning transactions from the past 3 months. Immediately, a pattern jumped out. Sporting goods stores, invoices for new badminton rackets, specialized shoes, and even entry fees for a local amateur tournament. The sums weren't huge, a few $100s each, but stacked together, they formed a solid figure. And all of it came directly out of the account tied to the community yoga classes Maya ran. I sipped bourbon, sat still for a moment, then smirked. My wife once taught her students to inhale deeply to release stress. I was inhaling deeply at the sight of $2,000 in tuition floating into the account of a part-time badminton player. Maya must have thought a few thousand would vanish like a breath in her studio. But to a lawyer, every digit is an exhibit waiting for a label. I opened Excel and logged each one. $350, Pro Shuttle Badminton Store. $180, Adidas Sports Chicago. $500, Amateur Tournament Registration Fee. $960, a vague donation transferred into an account under the name Adrian Cole. Total, $1,990. Nearly $2,000, enough to convince any jury this wasn't personal spending. This was embezzlement. I didn't jump to conclusions. Lawyers survive on precision. I called an old colleague, Mark, an accountant I'd trusted in financial cases. I sent him the statements and asked him to review them. A day later, he called back, chuckling. "Daniel, you don't need me to see it, but yes, this is embezzlement. Clear misuse of community funds, and if you want, it's enough to blow things wide open." I nodded, thanked him, and wrote it down. Exhibit C, financial irregularities, confirmed by the accountant. I remembered how Maya once said, "I don't teach yoga for the money. I want to help the community." I believed her, even felt proud. Now I understand. Helping the community meant funneling their tuition into Adrian's rackets and shiny sneakers. One evening, Maya showed me a gift from a student, a small hand-painted lotus. I even hung it in our living room. Tonight, I laughed bitterly. The students gave heartfelt art, while she gave their money to a man chasing shuttlecocks. I printed the statements, stapled them neatly. The click of the stapler sounded like a gavel. I could feel it. My private case had shifted stages. Before, I had evidence. Divorce. Money carries more weight than passion. That evening, Maya came home late, as usual. I sat on the sofa, TV humming, the file hidden under a cushion. She walked in, breathless, sweat on her brow. I glanced up, smiled faintly. "Busy class tonight?" She nodded, eyes darting away. "Yeah, more students than usual." I nodded back, sipped bourbon, and noted silently. Exhibit D, behavioral change, evasive response. Truthfully, I didn't need her answer. I already had the full map of the money trail. I knew where each tuition dollar went, whose shoes it bought, whose racket it strung. And the cruel comedy was this. Adrian, the man Maya trusted, survived on the tuition of middle-aged women searching for balance through yoga. A strange kind of symbiosis. Students inhaled deeply to find calm. Adrian inhaled the scent of brand new sneakers. I thought of an old case where a CEO embezzled from a charity to buy a yacht. When caught, he said, "I was only borrowing." Maya wasn't any different, except instead of a yacht, she borrowed to support a player who would never make the national team. I organized the file, labeled each section. Exhibit A, tube of lubricant. Exhibit B, ER admission. Exhibit C, financial irregularities. The file thickened, and I felt control returning. No longer just the betrayed husband, I was back in my role. a lawyer preparing for trial. And this time, the defendant was the woman who once vowed to walk with me for life. That night, I closed the file and stared at the lotus painting on the wall. I laughed to myself. The lotus rises from the mud. But in this case, the mud was tuition money, and the bloom was Adrian's badminton shoes. When the financial evidence sat neatly in my file, I knew there was no need to rush. A good lawsuit isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. You let the opponent exhaust themselves, stumble, and then you land the final blow. While Maya kept staging her fake yoga classes, Adrian pressed on with his half-baked badminton career. I heard he was playing in a local amateur tournament outside Chicago. A small event, but for him it was a chance to impress. Maya was, of course, in the stands, her yoga scarf draped over her shoulders like a badge of loyalty. I smiled, because I knew this was the perfect stage for my next exhibit. In my hand, I didn't just have financial records. I had something better, a short clip. EMTs escorted Maya and Adrian out of the Marriott that night of the fire. A friend at the hospital helped me confirm it. The clip was only seconds long, but it was pure theater. Two cheaters, flushed red, trying to keep composure while the medics maintained professionalism with smirks they could barely hide. I passed the clip, casually, to a local sports reporter known for writing humorous blurbs about community leagues. I added no comment, just a line. Thought you'd enjoy this. In journalism, bait always pulls harder than an official plea. The results were predictable. Within days, rumors spread through the badminton community. First whispers, didn't he get caught at the Marriott? Then chuckles. Heard they had to call EMTs. By the time the match began, the whole crowd sat like a silent jury. Adrian stepped onto the court, head high, racket swinging, trying for professionalism. But the eyes around him said everything. The laughter wasn't loud, just scattered enough for him to feel it. His opponent smirked during the handshake. A handshake, short, sharp, loaded with meaning. I know. Maya sat in the stands, arms crossed, eyes darting. She realized, at least in that moment, that the joke had outgrown her control. I sat far away, the program in my hand. But in my head I was filing another note. Exhibit D, public humiliation at community tournament. The match began. Adrian's first swings were shaky. Each chuckle threw him off. Each whispered, Marriott, made him stumble. By the second set, it happened. He collapsed, clutching his thigh, face twisted. A cramp, a pathetic ending. The crowd buzzed, some stood, but no one rushed forward. A voice rang out from the back. I thought badminton was about speed. I guess Adrian's fastest move was running out of that hotel. Laughter exploded. No clip, no article, just that joke was enough to etch his image in everyone's mind. Maya's face burned crimson. She stared at the floor, fists tight. From a distance, I saw the exact moment she knew. Everything she had built, from yoga classes to her personal blog to her image as the perfect wife, was collapsing, not in silence, but in snickering public judgment. Adrian limped off the court, drenched in sweat. Organizers recorded the result. Forfeit. I quietly noted in my book, Exhibit D, public collapse, witnessed by the community. I didn't need to stand, didn't need to shout. Justice arrived not by a judge's gavel, but by mocking applause and laughter. And sometimes that's the kind of justice people never forget. Maya and Adrian left in silence. She avoided every gaze. He forced a brittle smile. I stayed behind, watching. A few of Maya's students were there too, whispering, huddled close. I could guess what they were saying. The gossip had jumped beyond sports. It would spread to her classes, her blog, her so-called community outreach. Driving home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a cold satisfaction. I had won many cases, but never had I seen a jury so delighted to laugh. Back home, I opened the file and added pages, labeling them cleanly. Exhibit A, tube of lubricant. Exhibit B, ER admission. Exhibit C, financial irregularities. Exhibit D, public humiliation at a badminton tournament. The file grew heavier, thick as an indictment, and I knew, with each exhibit, Maya's chance of recovery slipped further away. A lawyer never rushes. We prepare, we wait, and we let the opposition dig their own grave. I set the file on the table, poured another bourbon, and looked out the window. Chicago's night was alive, lights glittering in the distance. But inside me, everything was clear. This marriage was no longer about love. It was a lawsuit, and I was winning, one exhibit at a time. After the humiliation at the badminton tournament, I knew Maya and Adrian wouldn't give up so easily. Cheaters share a common illusion. If they deny long enough, the world will forget. And just as I predicted, a few weeks later, the sports club where Adrian trained announced a fundraising gala. Maya and Adrian were invited to speak as community health and fitness representatives. I almost laughed reading the announcement. Two people hauled out of a Marriott by EMTs were now chosen as the faces of health and community spirit. The world always writes funnier scripts than I ever could. But I didn't laugh out loud. I simply marked the date on my calendar. Gala night. Exhibit E in the making. The ballroom glittered that evening. Gold lighting, white tablecloths, wine glasses at every seat, thank you cards folded neatly. Guests included local business owners, coaches, and even a handful of sports reporters. The stage loomed, screen ready for slides. Maya appeared in an emerald dress, smiling tightly, but still clinging to her image as the model yoga instructor. Adrian wore a suit too small, his face still pinched from the cramp fiasco. I sat in the back row, just another guest. In my bag, a USB drive waited patiently. When the MC introduced them, I rose, walked to the tech table, and handed the technician the USB. Supplementary slides for tonight's presentation. He frowned, but when I flashed my attorney's card, he nodded. In a gala, confidence is its own credential. Maya began to speak, voice soft, rehearsed. Yoga and sports bring health and connection to our community. Adrian nodded along, gripping the mic. A few polite claps. And then behind them, my slide appeared. Not the club's logo, not a thank you message. A Marriott invoice. Date and time matching one of Maya's supposed yoga classes. The room stirred. Maya turned, face frozen. I sipped wine calmly and wrote in my notebook. Exhibit E, Marriott receipts, presented publicly. Next slide, the money trail. A bright red arrow from Community Yoga Fund to Adrian Cole, private account. The graphic was deliberate, undeniable. Whispers spread, pens scratched, heads shook in disgust. And then the final slide, a screenshot of the text. Don't forget the tube. No caption. None was needed. The hall erupted. Some laughed, some gasped, some snapped photos with their phones. The MC stammered. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. There seems to be some mistake. Maya grabbed the mic, trembling. This is slander. It isn't true. But her words drowned in the roar. Adrian's face flushed crimson as his eyes darted toward the exits. A committee member rose, voice firm. We will open an immediate investigation. Until then, all contracts with Maya Cross and Adrian Cole are suspended. Applause followed. Not the warm kind, but the harsh clap of a jury after a damning verdict. Night. In that moment, the contrast was vivid. Maya, once preaching purity, now stammering on stage. Adrian, once swinging rackets with pride, now squirming like a student caught cheating. And me, the betrayed husband, sitting quietly like a judge, letting the evidence argue in my place. I thought of old courtroom dramas where lawyers thunder and plead with juries. I smiled, whispered just loud enough for myself. No Perry Mason, just PowerPoint. When the gala ended, Maya avoided my eyes. She slipped out the back with Adrian limping behind. Two defendants leaving court on probation. Reporters swarmed the organizers, demanding answers about the Yoga Fund scandal and the infamous text. I stepped into the Chicago night, cold wind on my face, feeling steady. From this night forward, it would no longer be a rumor. It was public record. Their names would hit local papers. Students would read it. Sponsors would retreat. and no one would forget those 3 slides. Back home, I added fresh printouts to the file. Exhibit A, tube of lubricant. Exhibit B, ER admission. Exhibit C, financial irregularities. Exhibit D, public humiliation at a badminton tournament. Exhibit E, gala night, public record. The binder grew heavy, thick as an indictment. I brushed the cover with my hand, smiled coldly. My private lawsuit was past the halfway mark. The climax was yet to come. But tonight, I allowed myself one satisfaction. Justice doesn't need shouting. Justice only needs 3 slides and a Mont Blanc pen resting on the table. When my case file grew so thick I couldn't clip another page into it, I knew the time had come. Maya's bedroom fire, the Marriott invoices, the tuition money funneled into Adrian's account, even the laughter at the gala. Every piece was bound together in a record thick enough to make any judge frown. And as an old lawyer, I knew one truth. Evidence doesn't belong in a drawer. Evidence belongs in court. I drafted the divorce petition without a single flourish. No irreconcilable differences. No, we've grown apart. Just the exhibits, paper, numbers, receipts, screenshots. My silence written into evidence, page after page, ink pressed firm. The morning of the hearing was bitterly cold, the Chicago wind testing every man's resolve. I walked into Cook County Court in the gray suit that had seen me through a dozen trials. Mont Blanc pen in my breast pocket, each step steady as if I were facing another high-stakes case. And I was. Only this time, the opposing party wasn't an insurance company or a corrupt CEO. It was my wife. Maya sat on the other side already. Business attire was sharp, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the night before. Adrian wasn't with her. I wasn't surprised. A parasite like him never had the backbone to enter a courtroom. He existed now only in the lines of my exhibits, nowhere else. The judge, an old man with silver hair and half-moon glasses, opened my file. I saw his brow lift at the Marriott bills, linger on the bank transfers, and finally sigh as he read the message. Don't forget the tube. His eyes met mine, stern but tinged with sympathy. Mr. Cross, his voice filled the room. Do you have anything to add before the court considers its ruling? I rose, eyes locked only on him, not on Maya, not in the gallery, calm, deliberate. Your Honor, the exhibits speak louder than I ever could. I sat back down, folded my hands. Let silence do the talking. In my career, I'd argued, persuaded, thundered for hours before juries. Today, I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken already. Maya leaned forward, voice trembling. Your Honor, this is distorted. The invoices could be mistakes, and the texts could be altered. The judge raised his hand. Mrs. Cross, enough. The record is clear. Irregular spending, overlapping schedules with hotel bills, suspension from your community club, all point to dishonesty. The court requires no further defense. The words hit like a gavel to the chest. Maya's shoulders dropped, her fingers interlaced tightly until her knuckles whitened. The judge set down his glasses, giving us one final look. After review, this court rules as follows. All marital property, including the current residence, is awarded to the petitioner, Mr. Daniel Cross. All debts arising from the yoga community classes, including the misappropriated funds, fall to the respondent, Mrs. Maya Cross. Case closed. 12 years of marriage dissolved in a single sound. I didn't glance at Maya. I gathered my papers, stacked the file neatly. Before leaving the table, I pulled out my Mont Blanc and wrote one final line in my notebook. Exhibit F, Final Judgment, Cook County Court. Maya sat hollow, eyes vacant, no tears, no pleas, only the void. Adrian, the man she gambled on, wasn't named, wasn't present, wasn't accountable. He had vanished like a coward from a crime scene, leaving her alone to face the verdict. I stepped out into the hall. The draft cut through, carrying whispers from others awaiting their cases. I walked straight, shoulders level, like a lawyer who had just won. And I had. I had won many trials before, against insurance fraud, against banks that stole from pensioners. But this was different. This time, my adversary was my wife. The taste was bitter, sharp, yet freeing. At home, I unlocked the door and entered the familiar quiet. No Maya chanting yoga mantras, no peppermint oil in the air. I sat on the sofa, poured bourbon, and sunlight struck the thick file on the table. I thought to myself, it's over. The case is closed. No triumphant music played in my mind, only silence. But for a lawyer, silence is the loudest verdict of all. After the trial, the judgment didn't just end my marriage. It toppled a domino chain in the world outside. Maya once thought divorce was a private matter between two people. She never imagined that once the truth became part of the public record, every door around her would slam shut. Within weeks, the community center canceled her yoga contract. The official notice used polite wording, loss of financial trust. But every student knew it was a softer way of saying embezzlement. The middle-aged women who once believed in her mantra, inhale, exhale, let go, moved to other classes. They whispered that Maya was no longer clean, not sweat dirty, trust dirty. Her personal yoga blog, once sprinkled with small sponsors for mats, oils, and activewear, dried up. No brand wanted to be linked to a name that appeared in the financial fraud section of the local paper. One day, when I searched her name on Google, the blog showed a cold message. This site is no longer available. Maya once swelled with pride when students tagged her on Instagram. Now, every mention came with gossip, memes, or mocking messages. I didn't have to lift a finger. Society did the work. Adrian fared even worse. After his cramp-ridden collapse at the amateur tournament, the badminton club cut his assistant coach contract. The statement was short. It no longer fits the club's image. Outside, his nickname spread fast. Hot Gel Guy. It began with sarcastic comments on sports forums. Then someone edited his photo beside a tube of gel, flames blazing behind. Every time he posted a training video, comments flooded in. Careful, don't get too hot. Don't forget the magic tube. Adrian became a living meme. The cruel twist? He once craved fame. Now he had it, in the way no one wanted. I didn't call it revenge. I just sat in the back row with bourbon and watched. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes through a stranger's keyboard, through Snickers at a gym, through the sidelong glance of a former student. And I thought to myself, justice isn't always dry. Sometimes it sticks, thanks to a cheap tube of gel. While Maya and Adrian scrambled in humiliation, I turned back to work. My own divorce forced me to see my profession differently. I defended clients against giant corporations. Now I realize smaller corporations lived under every roof. Relationships, promises, joint accounts, and women, so many, were victims, cheated out of both money and trust. I founded a small fund, Cross Legal Aid, not to get rich. I had had enough. This fund was for women defrauded by husbands or partners, women with no strong voice in court. I hired a few young associates, offered free consultations for family fraud cases. On opening day, I stood at the podium. No PowerPoint this time. I simply said, I built this fund from personal experience. I know how family can betray you, not just with love, but with numbers in a bank account. Reserved for million-dollar cases. It belongs even in the $2,000 yoga scam. Applause filled the room. I saw a few older women nodding, tears slipping quietly. I knew I was on the right path. At home, I opened the old case file, flipping through each exhibit. Exhibit A, tube of lubricant. Exhibit B, ER admission. Exhibit C, embezzled funds. Exhibit D, badminton humiliation. Exhibit E, gala, public record. Exhibit F, final judgment. The file now looked more like a diary, but instead of hiding it away, I placed it on the shelf between my law books to remind me that sometimes the most important case of your life isn't a million-dollar trial. It's the one inside your own family. Each morning, I sit on my porch, sip coffee, and watch the Chicago sunrise. No bitterness remains, only calm. I think of Maya, probably tangled in debts and disgrace. I think of Adrian, frantically deleting Instagram comments he can't outrun. And I think of myself, a man who walked through a storm and found peace again, not by forgetting, but by facing the truth. I don't need to shout victory. I only need silence. Because silence sometimes is the loudest voice of all. When everything was finally over, I sat in my study, the same room where I had drafted hundreds of contracts and defended dozens of clients. But this time, I wasn't writing for anyone else. On the desk lay the closed file, thick binders stamped cross v cross in bold, and right beside it, the empty tube, the piece of evidence that had started it all, rested quietly. I picked it up, turned it under the lamp. Nothing left inside, just a cold, gleaming shell. I smiled, slid it into the drawer beside my Mont Blanc pen, and whispered as if reading a verdict. Exhibit A, case closed. In law, the most important clause is always the truth. Every argument, every strategy, all circle back to a single point. Whoever holds the truth wins. In marriage, it turned out to be the same. Not love, not vows, but the truth decides the ending. I learned that lesson not from law school, but from my own home. A lawyer doesn't win by shouting louder. He wins by letting the evidence speak. And in marriage, I won the same way. I repeated to myself, like a three-line rule I'll carry forever. I don't need to shout. I don't need to beg. I don't need to defend. All I needed was a tube of gel and a little patience, cheaper than a private investigator and far more effective. Justice isn't always dry. Sometimes it sticks, thanks to a cheap tube of gel. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let silence settle. Not the silence of bitterness, the silence of justice is fulfilled. I didn't need Maya to confess. I didn't need Adrian to apologize. All I needed was to sit in the house, my house, and know that truth had done its work. If you've listened this far, maybe you've seen a crack in your own life, in a family, at work, in a friendship. At first, the crack looks small, like a tube of gel misplaced in a yoga bag. But if you watch closely, patiently, you'll see the whole bridge begin to tremble. And one day, it will collapse, without you lifting a hand. If this story reminded you of a crack in your own life, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, New York, Dallas, or a small town in Iowa. I want to see how far justice travels, from my Chicago to every corner of this country and beyond. And if you believe silence, truth, and a little humor are the strongest weapons, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Each week, I'll share another silent revenge, where betrayal burns itself out without me ever striking a match. Remember, justice doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it lives in a cheap tube of gel, a hotel receipt, or a bank statement. The key isn't shouting. It's quiet note-taking, patient waiting, and letting the truth ignite everything on its own. I closed the drawer, where the empty tube rested beside my Mont Blanc. To me, it wasn't just a relic of a broken marriage.